All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. History is literally packed with stories of legendary warriors, massive revolutions, and, seemingly impossible victories. But honestly, few stories strike the human heart quite as deeply or as powerfully as the one we're diving into today. We're looking at the ultimate underdog story of Judas Maccabeus. Because long before modern struggles for freedom ever dominated our news feeds, there was one family who dared to stand up to a massive, unstoppable empire. And they weren't fighting for land, they weren't trying to get rich, they were fighting for something so much deeper than that.
I mean, think about it. What if a tiny, mismatched group of rebels stood up against the absolute most powerful empire in the world and actually won? Against completely overwhelming odds, this group said no to an empire that was actively trying to erase their faith, their culture, and their entire identity. They fought back for one simple, absolutely non-negotiable right: the right to worship freely.
And really, that brings us to the core stakes of the whole thing. It's wild how this ancient story feels so incredibly modern, right? For a lot of us, the idea of freedom is just woven right into our DNA. The belief that no government should ever have the power to control your conscience or force you to drop your deepest beliefs, that is a timeless ideal. And that is exactly why we're not just looking at some dusty old battle to memorize. This is a story about raw courage, deep conviction, and flat-out refusing to surrender the things that matter most.
Which brings us to Section 1 and Empire of Oppression. So to really wrap our heads around what was on the line here, we have to look at the sheer darkness these people were facing. We're talking almost 2,200 years ago. This entire region was completely under the thumb of the massive Seleucid Empire. The king, this guy named Antiochus IV Epiphanes, makes a highly calculated move. He basically decides to force Greek customs and religion onto the Jewish people. And he didn't just suggest it, he took extreme measures. He completely outlawed their traditional worship, and then, in a totally devastating blow to their identity, he actually desecrated their most sacred space, the temple in Jerusalem.
You can probably imagine the horrific atmosphere of fear that instantly spread across the land. The empire wasn't just passing annoying laws. They were brutally punishing anybody who dared to stay faithful to their own beliefs. Imagine waking up one day and being told that your traditions, your beliefs, your entire way of life is suddenly illegal. Under that kind of suffocating pressure, well, a lot of people just complied so they could survive. Others hid in absolute silence. The oppression literally blanketed everything.
But then we hit Section 2, the spark of rebellion. Because, as we know, oppression can only push people so far before something snaps. Right in the middle of this total darkness, one single act of defiance flipped the script. And it didn't start in some giant fortress or a rich capital city. Nope, it started in a tiny, totally unassuming village called Mudin. In this little town, there was one priest who flat out refused to bow. His name was Mattathias. When the empire's soldiers directly ordered him to offer a pagan sacrifice, Mattathias didn't just, politely decline. He publicly and fiercely told them absolutely not.
According to the ancient accounts, he yells out with this immense conviction: anyone who remains loyal to God should follow me. Just pause and think about the sheer bravery of that exact moment. Right after that declaration, Mattathias and his sons make a run for it into the harsh wilderness. And out there, safely away from the immediate grip of the empire, a real resistance movement begins to simmer.
Let's move to Section 3. Enter the hammer.
Sadly, Mattathias passes away, and leadership of this super fragile growing rebellion falls to his son Judas. And Judas, well, he earned a very specific legendary nickname, Maccabeus. It heavily associates with the word hammer, and honestly, it fit the guy perfectly. Judas essentially became this relentless, blunt instrument striking back against the suffocating weight of the Seleucid Empire.
Now, what is really fascinating here is the sheer asymmetry of this fight. I mean, look at this comparison. On one side, you've got the Seleucid Empire, highly trained armies, state-of-the-art weapons, massive political influence, and just endless piles of cash. On the other side, Judas is leading a scrappy little force of ordinary people. We're talking farmers, villagers, and people acting purely on faith, with basically zero military experience. By every single worldly metric, these rebels were going to get crushed. It seemed completely inevitable.
So, how in the world did they pull it off? Why did the underdogs actually win? Well, Judas understood something that a lot of big, arrogant leaders totally forget. People fight infinitely harder when they are defending their own identity, their family, and their freedom. His guys weren't mercenaries just looking for a paycheck, they believed they were protecting the actual soul of their nation. Tapping into that intense passion, Judas used brilliant guerrilla strategy, massive courage, and relentless surprise attacks to completely dismantle enemy armies that vastly outnumbered his own. and every time he won, it shocked the empire and inspired more everyday people to join the fight.
For us today, this part of the story probably hits pretty close to home. It definitely carries echoes of the American Revolutionary War, doesn't it? That same spirit of ordinary people refusing to back down to an overbearing, massively powerful empire. It's this recurring theme in human history, but you rarely see it executed with stakes quite this high.
Next up, Section 4, the Miracle of Light.
See, this revolt was never just a political thing. At its core, it was a deeply spiritual fight. After miraculously turning the tide of the entire war, the rebels achieved the unthinkable. They actually recaptured Jerusalem. But the victory wasn't finished just by taking the city back. They had to restore the soul of it. So they go in to cleanse the desecrated temple, scrubbing out all the pagan artifacts, and they prepared to rededicate this deeply sacred space back to their God.
Which brings us to arguably the most famous and emotional moment of the whole story. According to Jewish tradition, as they were getting ready to rededicate the temple, they realized they only had enough sacred oil to keep the eternal flame burning for one single day. And yet, miraculously, that tiny little bit of oil burned brightly for 8 full days.
And yeah, if that sounds familiar, that incredible event is exactly what connects to the timeless celebration of Hanukkah, the Festival of Lights. It evokes such a powerful image, doesn't it? Light surviving and even thriving in total, suffocating darkness. It's this enduring symbol that even when things seem completely burnt out and extinguished, hope can still burn bright. Which leads us to our final section, the price of conviction. Because let's be real, what Judas achieved was not some neat and tidy fairy tale. The reality of resistance is brutal. Judas and his followers faced devastating losses, agonizing setbacks, and just bone-deep exhaustion. They lived every single day in constant danger, but they kept moving forward anyway. It's such a vital reminder that true courage isn't the absence of fear, not at all. It's the deliberate choice that something else, your faith, your freedom, your family, matters way more than that fear. In the world we live in today, where there's constantly this immense pressure to conform, to just stay quiet, or to avoid rocking the boat, this explainer serves as a really urgent reminder. Freedom is incredibly fragile. Your values actually matter. Faith and identity are always worth defending, especially when the culture around you becomes hostile.
The absolute best underdog stories are always about transformation. Judas Maccabeus took fear and transformed it into resistance. He took despair and turned it into hope. He proved that massive, powerful empires aren't always defeated by sheer strength or bigger armies. Sometimes they're defeated by unbreakable, unshakable conviction.
Because when you look at history, the people who actually changed the world were usually the ones who looked completely outmatched right at the starting line. So when life feels totally overwhelming, or when the odds stacked against you seem literally impossible, remember the rebel who refused to kneel. He showed us all that even the smallest flame can overcome the absolute darkest night. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, challenging question to think about. What would you stand for if everything you cared about was at risk? If that moment ever came, would you stay silent just to stay comfortable? Or would you find the courage to resist? Think about that, and keep that fire burning. Until next time, stay curious.